Well, hello, and welcome to World Breach Report number 3, the third one. We're up there now, and boy, oh boy, I am so grateful for everyone who has been liking and subscribing and sharing Sean Hunt's Monsters on YouTube. I cannot believe the growth that has been happening. I'm completely blown away. I never in a million years thought I'd be growing quite this quickly. So again, thank you very much. I am, of course, your host, Sean, and I wanted to give a special, before we get started here, I want to give a special shout out to Theotzu, which is Theotzu. He's a crypto god and a DJ and a guy who's since before the times of forever, this guy has been on me. He's tracked me. He's about the best stalker a guy could ask for. And the fact that he's been pushing me a long time to get back on the air and to be doing things. So, you know, I'd be lying if I didn't say that Theo didn't have a huge hand in helping me get forwards, and not really with he's offered to help with production value, which no doubt he'd be better at it than I would be, but just encouragement, which is kind of funny, you know, in our society today, nobody's really encouraging. I mean, it's not like everybody's trying to tear each other down. It's a weird sort of, I don't know, energy that sort of goes on in the world today. And, well, it means a lot to me that all of you out there even give a crap. So I guess also it goes to show that there's quite a few people who are really kind of aware that a lot of the media in this field seems to kind of go circular. It's just round and round and round, and, you know, oh, Congress didn't do anything, and oh, we don't know what that is, and, you know, what are those black triangles? You know, well, they're ships. Okay, they're ships. We know they're ships. We don't know where they come from. They're probably U.S. tech. If they're not U.S. tech, then they're definitely in league with the U.S. because they've been taking off and landing at their bases. There's a lot going on here. So disclosure is kind of irrelevant, as I've said before, but, you know, we need to start talking about what it is we can do in order to organize ourselves and get the monster hunters ready for whatever kind of ontological shock is coming down the pipe. On that, I've been asked about the starting up a Discord server, which I think is a pretty good idea. Actually, I might get a Discord server up, so I'll let you know the minute that thing's live, and everyone will be able to jump on there, and we'll be able to start to get this going. I also would like it if people could let me know of any locations that are near you. Areas, thin spaces, as I come to call them. These are places where you know what I'm talking about. This is where Dogman, Bigfoot, weird hauntings, weird lights, even areas where you go there and you're like, it's a bad vibe. You know what I mean? Like you'll go to like some area of a river or something, or, you know, some lake or some pond, and you're like, yeah, man, that's the juju there is just bad. Even Tucker Carlson, he went forwards and was talking about an area of this river where he was like, yeah, man, there's just this bad vibe, which means that it's some kind of side effects. There's some kind of, like, I don't know, there's something trying to keep us away from there. And those are the kind of locations that monster hunters are like, hey, this is our planet, this is our world, we're gonna go check that out, because, you know, I think that we should do that. So Patreon and all that is coming, and as the channel grows, there'll be an opportunity more and more to build this community. I had a dream, which was like this road warrior dream, where I had this idea of making an overland community, you know, where we'd be able to go on like road trips. And instead of just doing it on the streets, we'd be able to actually, you know, kind of maybe get some guy with a flamethrower and a guitar on the top of a rig with a bunch of guys on poles waving back and forth. But barring that, you know, just anything with wheels would be cool. And just be able to drive out to some of these locations and have it as a meetup, but also as an investigation. If you look at guys like Stephen Greer, he was doing some consciousness stuff where he gets like 10, 12 people together doing consciousness experiments, and they were able to call these orbs down. So I was kind of thinking, what if we could get like, I don't know, a couple hundred people, maybe 1,000 people down to some location, and everybody, you know, kind of manifest, you know, like what, I don't know, just a thought. But I thought that would be a neat idea in the fullness of time, because it's about community and about support. And I don't mean community in like the, you know, one of us, everyone has to, you know, build their own congregation or whatever. I mean that there needs to be support for us moving forwards, because it seems like everything in all the media, all the TV shows, everywhere we go is all about, well, division. You know, it's all trying to drive each other and apart and keep us all like locked inside of our tiny little cubicles, and we're not really willing to get out into the world. So that's something that moving forward, stay tuned. We'll be talking more about that. But let's get into the actual World Breach Report, shall we? So I had this one sent in to me by Ronan Sariat. A submarine found anomalous structures in Antarctica and then loses the signal. This is a great report here. An unmanned submarine mapping the West Antarctica's Dotson ice shelf, not Antarctica, or pardon me, not Atlantis, Antarctica. It's important to, make that designation difference, even though, probably Antarctica is Atlantis. But anyway, they were mapping the West Antarctica's Dotson ice shelf, reported strange under ice structures, and then went silent 10 miles underneath the ice shelf. The vehicle, called RAN, had spent weeks scanning the ice, roughly 50 square miles, revealing patterns that upended simple melt models. An unmanned submarine mapping West Antarctica's Dotson ice shelf. The vehicle, using sonar, RAN mapped 54 square miles of ice beneath the Dotson ice shelf. The maps revealed flat plateaus, terrace steps, and teardrop-shaped pits, all carved by the basil melting the attacks from the ice below. East of the center, RAN saw icy terraces stacked like steps, while the west looked smoother with channels of scoop depressions. None of these terraces or teardrop pits show up on satellite images, so they had remained completely hidden until RAN's mission. And then the report goes on to talk about how this is all, we think it was this and we think it was that. And of course, they spin this whole thing saying, global warming and blah, 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 blah. But I find it fantastic that they'll go, scan something, see a bunch of steps and stuff that's underneath the ice, and then they're like, well, we don't know what that is, but it's probably this. Well, what part of you don't know what that is do you not understand? Quite obviously, you don't know what that is. So maybe, hey, I got an idea. Why don't we go down to Antarctica and go check that out? You know what I mean? Like, that'd be a good idea. We could go do, oh no, you can't. Yeah, they won't let you near Antarctica. You can't go on Antarctica. There's some guys who went down there, tried to cross-country ski in Antarctica, and like Black Hawk helicopters showed up. You are not allowed to go near Antarctica, which is beyond wild to me. And just do some initial, we'll probably do a whole show on Antarctica, but let me tell you, man, there's some weird stuff going on in Antarctica. Me personally, I'm kind of with the Jason Giorgiani idea that Atlantis is Antarctica, because everybody says that Atlantis sank, except the Persians, who got really the oldest books. I mean, these guys were making books when we were still writing on leaves and stuff. And according to them, Atlantis froze. So, that's interesting. Not to mention, I mean, there's a lot of creepy stuff that's going on in Antarctica. So, always interesting. And of course, the undersea thing, I mean, now USOs are a big deal. This is underwater submerged objects, which is just UFOs that go underwater. And it does kind of make sense that if you had the kind of technology where you could build a base, why wouldn't you build it at the bottom of the ocean? None of us monkeys can get down there. So that sounds like a good idea. Now, Admiral Tim Gallaudet, underwater alien base USO Psyops and weather weapons, was featured on Sean Ryan some time ago, but he talked about this. And when this submarine thing came up, it made me think about it. Tim Gallaudet is a retired Navy admiral and oceanographer. Gallaudet's afloat tours include Oceanographic Unit 5 above the USNS Harkness, USS Peleliu, and the USS Kitty Hawk. During these tours, Gallaudet served in Operations Southern Watch, provided promise, sharp garb, Denny flight, enduring freedom, and Iraqi freedom. He also led management of the nation's fisheries, coastal resources, waterways, weather satellites, weather services, and environmental research as deputy administrator of the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. And today he's the CEO of Ocean STL Consulting, a firm that has enabled public and private entities to explore USOs and the ocean at large. Now, what's interesting in this interview, which he does with Sean Ryan, which is linked, of course, in the description, is that you'll find that he actually names locations, like one specific location off of the west coast of the United States, very specifically where there's an alien base. And he says you can go on Google Earth and you can do this, and you can look down and you can see there's these wedges that are carved in there, and he says it looks a lot like columns. It's a wild interview, and this guy is not some schmo. I mean, this guy knows what he's doing, so you want to check that out. And when I myself, part of my skills on my character sheet that I've been working on is I got myself pretty heavily into diving. And diving is one of those things that I cannot recommend highly enough. Now, granted, there's a great number of people that are watching this program that cannot get near the ocean. I totally respect that. But if you live near the ocean, especially if you're in the southern states and you live near the ocean like Florida, get in the water. Like, get in the water. There is so much crazy stuff that goes on within the ocean. And besides, it's an excuse to, like I said, build the character sheet and get out there. The way that the oceans have been swallowing up civilizations, the way that you learn by just doing in the water is incredible. So something to think about there, but definitely you want to check out that interview. And moving on this as well, there's more and more talking about alien bases. These are actual physical locations, which is why I opened talking about, if you know of any locations or thin spaces, I need to know about it. You can, until we get the Discord server, or even after we get the Discord server set up, post it in the comments. That way it's not just me. That way everybody gets to see it. And hopefully, as the channel grows, we'll be able to get people in every state. And then it's possible that as these thin spaces, creepy locations get discovered, we can get some missions in there. We can get people going in there to check that stuff out. Kind of like, I don't know, your very own Call of Cthulhu module, only it's open source with people who are more badass. But anyway, so Congressman Eric Burlison, now this was actually just came out this week. Congressman Eric Burlison flags Mount Hayes in growing UAP discussions. Now, Mount Hayes, man, this is crazy. So let me get through this. Mount Hayes does not announce itself. It does sit near highways. It does not sit near highways or population centers, and does not appear frequently in tourist photography. It rises quietly from the eastern Alaska range, massive, glaciated, and isolated, occupying a region where distance is measured not in miles, but in hours of flight, and weather can erase visibility in minutes. On the surface, it appears to be nothing more than another remote mountain in a state full of them. Yet for decades, Mount Hayes has been quietly accumulating a reputation that refuses to fade. It has a reputation built not on spectacle, but on repetition. That repetition moved into public view when U.S. Congressman Eric Burlison, a lawmaker already involved in the UAP hearings and disclosure efforts, publicly drew attention to Mount Hayes. There was no explanation attached, no follow-up clarification, no attempt to contextualize the reference. He simply highlighted the location. For those unfamiliar with that mountain, the mention passed unnoticed. For those who have spent years tracking anomalous geography, disappearance, and persistence UAP reports in Alaska, the signal was unmistakable. Mount Hayes is not some random point in the map. Now, what's crazy here is, Alaska is, now, we're, of course, that little bit of dirt that exists between the United States and, Washington and Alaska. I live in British Columbia, which is a pretty wild region. So that's one of the reasons why, as we go forward with the channel, I want to be going out there and we're going to be spending real-time boots on the ground doing this. Now, the only downside to this is when you're in BC, you've got maybe 4 months, maybe 5 months that you can get out there and do stuff in the coastal mountain range, because, well, all you got to do is go watch the first couple of seasons of Alone, and you'll see that the terrain here is very severe. And unlike most other places that were settled by ships coming in, British Columbia was settled by coming from the east down through the Fraser Canyon, and then we sort of made this little area that became Vancouver and the interior and all these flatlands. But largely, above Vancouver, you've got like a few, little towns and stuff, and Vancouver Island got sort of populated, but the vast majority of our coastline is largely unexplored. You go like half a mile in and on any direction, and it could be the first time that anyone's ever been there. And this is a massive UFO hotspot, specifically Vancouver Island. And they used to call Vancouver Island Ape Island because of all the Sasquatch reports. So while everybody makes a big deal about Skinwalker Ranch, let me tell you, it used to be called Supernatural British Columbia, and Supernatural is right. Now, moving back on this Mount Hayes thing, which is pretty interesting, because there was reports that came in talking about how there was essentially a pyramid underneath Mount. I mean, there's some wild stories about Mount Hayes. And AJ down at Y-Files does a massively good job talking about this on an episode which I've linked, which I definitely recommend for you to check out. Y-Files, Project 8200 Exposed. Now, exposing underground alien bases, CIA psychic UFO hunters during the 1960s and 70s, the United States and Soviet Union fought a Cold War on many fronts. Some of these engagements were obvious, like the Cuban Missile Crisis and the proxy wars in Asia. Other conflicts were not so obvious. In the 70s, America and Russia engaged in a new type of warfare, psychic warfare. The CIA was actively recruiting and training people with a natural talent for remote viewing. Now they're kind of grabbing them from the jungles and down in South America and that, because, you know, when you don't live surrounded by all this tech, your psi abilities get, but we'll talk about that later. One remote viewer, and entirely by accident, found himself at Mount Hayes in Alaska. The Mount Hayes is in the middle of nowhere. There's no civilization for miles, but as something was calling him to the mountain, he looked inside the mountain. There was a base hidden inside of Mount Hayes. Then he saw, and this was not base built by humans. When the multiple sources confirmed the existence of the base, they soon realized this was only the beginning. Now, we've all heard of the Bermuda Triangle, but there's a bunch of triangles that exist all over the world. One of them is called the Alaska Triangle. And it's interesting because people go missing in every state. Like you go to Hawaii, you can see that's a beautiful place. People go missing. Washington, lots of forests. People go missing. Death Valley, you know, people are going to go missing there. You know, you got desert, lots of bad things can happen. But in Alaska, 16,000 people have gone missing in the Alaska Triangle since 1988. 16,000 people. That's just one stat. And that came from that Y-Files accident. But, like, it's interesting that the idea of these UFO bases existing here on Earth. Now, I'm not sure that I believe that they're UFO bases, because people tell you, oh, well, it's a UFO base. And if the government tells you it's a UFO base, it's probably not a UFO base. Well, that's where these lights emerge from. Yeah, that could be a portal. That could be a place that just open, like gates open, and these things come through. Maybe it's for whatever reason. It could be geomagnetic. Philip Imbrogno talked about some of that stuff in his books. So maybe there's a base there, or maybe that's just a thin space where it works like a port into another dimension. And if the best way to do this, of course, is to look at the actual 8200 files. Now, you can actually purchase. Skip Atwater came out with, because Skip Atwater was one of the guys who's still in charge down at the Monroe Institute. The Monroe Institute is essentially the shop, okay, from the Stephen King novels. I mean, it's a CIA-run psychic factory. That's where everyone's getting their... I shouldn't say it's CIA-run. Just everybody who's there has worked for the CIA. So, you know, nothing against the guys at the Monroe Institute. I'm sure they're very nice people, but it can't be denied that these guys are pretty heavily connected to some wild stuff. And as you can see, all this consciousness research kind of spins out from the Stargate program and Op Grill Flame and all these organizations that are using this real tactical skill to build up their powers, for lack of a better term. Now, this is interesting because he came out, he just Skip Atwater without any authorization. He got on, he went and published his own book on this called Project 8200. A little bit more on this. In 1973, Pat Price, a former police officer in Burbank, California, embarked on a remote viewing investigation of 4 underground UFO bases on his own without a monitor or established protocols, and while working for the SRI International as a private contractor. When Price offered his self-engendered transcript to SRI personnel, they were greatly surprised, as they had not asked him to do this remote viewing exercise. Years later, when things had quieted down about this incident, the INSCOM Stargate remote viewing unit at Fort Meade, Maryland, initiated a challenge target training program called Project 8200 regarding Pat Price's investigations. Project 8200 was a dedicated attempt to evaluate the operational capabilities and limitations of remote viewing, identifying and developing individually remote viewing skills, testing and evaluating accuracy on remote viewing on unique targets. Skip Atwater the unit's operations and training officer, used Pat Price's transcripts and information provided by Dr. Harold Putoff to put together targeting folders to use in the Stargate Challenge target training. Now, this is important, none of the results of Project 8200 training sessions were ever reported up the chain of command. Now, I bought the book. It's literally their sketches and notes. So it's one of those kind of things that if you're like a hardcore librarian who wants to have this kind of data, physical copy, just in case, for whatever reason, all this sort of gets forgotten and then it's out of print, you can't get it anymore. Yeah. Skip Atwater also wrote a book called Captain of My Living with Guidance, Captain My Ship, or something to that effect. That's on order. I've got it on order. But apparently in there with the book comes a CD-ROM, back when we had CD-ROMs. And I'm still waiting on that bad boy. When you do, that has a lot of the original remote viewing transcripts as well. Because let's just go to source with this. Don't listen to me. So if I can get all this stuff together, that's another reason, digitally to get a Discord server up. Not that we would trade anything that's copyrighted. Definitely nothing illegal going on any Discord services. Monster hunters don't break the law. We break monsters. That's what we do. So I would recommend if, that book is a good book. It's expensive. It's only available in hardcover. But, make up your own mind because Skip Atwater wound up on the Sean Ryan show. Now, Sean Ryan, he was an ex-CIA guy, and I like Sean Ryan a lot. Actually, I really respect him, and he's also probably the scariest long-form, interviewer on the web. Like Joe Rogan used to do mixed martial arts and probably still does jiu-jitsu and mixed martial arts, but Sean Ryan, he's a CIA contractor, used to work with, the Navy SEALs and pew pew, that's the kind of guy that Sean Ryan is. And I'm sure he's a super nice guy. Please, Sean Ryan, don't shoot me. He's a hell of a nice guy. And he's been really getting amazing interviews. And one of the amazing interviews he got was Skip Atwater. And Skip Atwater, bizarre alien encounter, remote viewing, Mars, and psychic operations. So from his read-up, Skip Atwater is a notable figure in the remote viewing and psychic research. He served in counterintelligence during the Cold War and was instrumental in launching the U.S. Army's Stargate program. There's Stargate again, when he recruited and trained intelligence officers to conduct remote viewing for the Department of Defense and other national intelligence agencies, which is a nice way of saying he worked with psychics and creating psychic protocols. After retiring from the Army, Atwater became the research director at the Monroe Institute. Not the shop, the Monroe Institute, focusing on the expansion of human consciousness. He authored Captain of My Ship, Master of My Soul. That's the name of the book, and has published a plethora of technical research. He currently serves as the president of the International Remote Viewing Association, the IRVA, and has been featured on a wide variety of radio programs and documentaries about psychic phenomenon, and speaks at seminars and conferences worldwide to share his experiences and expertise in remote viewing and consciousness exploration. Which, when they say remote viewing and consciousness exploration, it kind of sounds more scientific, but these guys are full-on psi-ability dudes doing journeys out of their body to go travel to other dimensions and within this realm of existence. These are guys that literally turn into ghosts. Not like Ghost Recon, I mean like Casper. Okay, these guys, they can get out of their body, go to some location, look at information, and then come back. And that's just the protocols that the original guy who started all of it was Ingo Swann. He was not super popular with the military crowd because he wasn't a super military guy. But I digress. The Gateway program is one of those things that as we go forward as monster hunters, there is real and valid data. And I say this personally because I've done the tapes. The way they work is the Gateway process now, just as a bit of a segue, they do this thing called hemisync where they play one tone in this ear and they play one tone in this ear and the tones are different, but your brain will synchronize the tones so that, like say you have a tone number 3 going here and tone number 1 here, it'll synchronize to tone 2 inside of your head. You see what I'm saying? So how that's great is because it can basically put your brain into a brainwave state that would take you years to master doing meditation. It's like using technology to hack your head. it's pretty amazing stuff. And this is what this HemiSync thing is. So HemiSync is part of the program that was used with the Gateway program. And you can buy these tapes, you can do all this stuff, you can acquire them from somewhere if you want to experiment with it. I mean, they're expensive if you buy them from the Monroe Institute. They're like $90 each. So, you know, see where, you know, you can check one out at your library or something like that. Might be something to look at. But the document that got me interested in this, because I got interested in this quite a while ago, is when it first got put online, was the analysis and assessment of the Gateway progress. Sorry, analysis and assessment of the Gateway process, which I've linked in the description. Now, this is one of probably my favorite PDF document regarding to the Gateway program. I really, there's nothing better than this one, because it's a report that was issued by a soldier who got sent, like, you know, Apocalypse Now style, to the Monroe Institute, which is a civilian organization. Robert Monroe was a businessman. He created this place. And he got sent there to be like, hey, why don't you go check out this this location, report back to me, and, you know, we'll see if there's anything to this. Does it make people psychics? Because we'd like to have psychic soldiers. Can you do anything with this? And it's... It's a regular report, and it rapidly turns into a Call of Cthulhu module. Like, it starts out with this guy who's, you know, talking about, yeah, you know, here's it, and then you're like, I think it's like 16 pages long, and let me tell you, by the time you're like 10 pages, he's like, in your mind, the dimensional fields, and you're going to encounter other beings in other dimensions. It's great stuff. I mean, really, if you were to run a Call of Cthulhu game, you could just basically hand out this document just as it is from the CIA. I provided the link from the CIA to download it, and, you know, just hand it out to people, and they're like, well, it's like a sales brochure if you're a weirdo and you want to buy one of these CDs and start screwing around to see if you can develop your psychic abilities. Because let me tell you, apparently psionics are a thing. The whole Hunt for Red October, those Red October submarines, they found that the October class submarine by doing remote viewing. They found a downed satellite. They found jets. I mean, it is crazy. And we already know that psychics work with detectives. That happens. I'm sure you've heard of it. Everyone has a story about a psychic and psychic premonitions. So it makes sense that there's some people that have, you know, a natural ability this way, and they work with it. Some people, they don't. It just comes to them. But they've tried to create a protocol that works around this stuff. And that's what essentially the Gateway process. And now I'm summing up on this, and again, there's a lot of guys who've been involved with this, but this reoccurring theme around this particular research is very useful. And I'm sure there's lots of other ways to do it, but I find that once you get into the psychic field, there's a lot of touchy-feely kind of woo-woo stuff where, you know, I want hard data, man. I want to work with stuff. And this is a really good way to do that. So, Robert Monroe, the guy who started all this stuff, he was a rich dude who was a businessman. And then he essentially accidentally started having out-of-body experiences where he was just getting out of his body and was able to do stuff. And he talks about all this in 3 books. And I've linked to all 3 books as audiobooks because, again, audiobooks for the win, okay? Get an Audible subscription. Credits are $13. You'll notice very quickly all these books I'm linking to are like $26, $30, $40. They're expensive books, but if you do it through Audible, you can get the whole thing read to you as a hot media. So whenever you're in the car, boom, you're eating this stuff. Or you can throw on headphones and boom, it's going straight into your head. Hot media for the win. Get credits. And you can buy credits, or if somebody asks for it for a gift, you can get like someone buys you a membership and you've already got the membership. What happens is they just give you all the credits as though you had a year all at once. So you've got like 13 credits stacked up, and you can just go whole hog into this stuff. So the 3 books which I've linked to are Journeys Out of the Body, Far Journeys, and Ultimate Journey. And this is the guy who is the total source on the CIA program. Okay, Skip Atwater, Pat Price, all these guys, they were all like in the dojo that Robert Monroe built of the Monroe Institute. Okay, so you definitely want to check this out because he makes it very clear about this thing called Loosh, which we'll get into in a little bit here. But one of the guys, so when Robert Monroe was just getting started and he was building up the Monroe Institute, he had to work with some researchers. And he called a bunch of scientists out. This is before any of this crap gets going, okay? Before any of the CIA got involved. He brought some guys out, and there was a young researcher who came out and worked with him named Thomas Campbell. And Thomas Campbell, he wrote another trilogy because he got into transcendental meditation. Wound up being recruited, essentially, by Robert Monroe. He talks about how all this happened, and I've got links to some podcasts there. Check it out. But he has spent his whole life without psychedelics. So there's no drugs involved here. And he has come up with a theory of everything. Now, his theory of everything, let's be clear, is a model. But let me see what I got here for you. His trilogy is called My Big Toe, Theory of Everything. And it is, I warn you now, the man is the king of dad jokes. So when you get in there, there's a lot of groaning dad jokes. But hey, you know, it's very accessible. Anyone can read this, and it's pretty useful. But again, highly recommend the audiobooks, okay? Because there's some pretty heavy stuff. What I usually do is I'll buy the actual book, and then I'll buy the audiobooks, so it's kind of like read along with me in your book kind of thing. Because often when you get to some heavy stuff, it's hard to look up something you remember hearing in the book, and you're like, oh, where was that? So you can use it the actual physical book as a reference. So buy both is what I would recommend. But Thomas, he did an interview where I discovered him on Danny Jones, and it's a good one. I linked to Joe Rogan one as well. But it's important to note that this guy is hard science. So there's not a lot of woo-woo with this guy. And when you get into his book, he heavily leans on the digital, like AI, and how using computers as a consciousness as a model, and AI as a model for how our consciousness works. And he's also, early on in his books, he's like, there's no room in any of this for rugged individualism. You're not that important, all this kind of jazz. Which, I mean, I get it. The universe is a big place, okay? It's a big universe. There's lots of stuff going on here. But you're important, so, I mean, be advised, we're not talking about, you know, the fact that, you know, there's so many skeptics who will sit there, and if they can't touch it and feel it, I'm not going to, because that's just fear, okay? That's all just fear manifesting. They don't want to go outside of their house because the monsters will get them. So you want to check out his book. Now, I don't want everyone to join the Robert Monroe cult and do the Monroe Institute thing. But let me tell you, if you're watching this and you actually have some psychic abilities, like you genuinely do, you can do stuff. If you go to the Monroe Institute, you'll get a job working for the CIA. Guaranteed. I promise you, if you were to show up down at the Monroe Institute and be like, hey, I can make things levitate, they'll be like, really? Show us. And you'll be like, woo! And that's it, man. You'll get a job offer. I'm pretty sure of it, because everybody who works there, who's all in senior management, is all like 100% hooked up in that world. Now, in his book, Far Journeys, I talked about this before, Robert Monroe introduced a controversial concept called loosh. And you'll see how this is all relevant. Loosh, L-O-O-S-H, which he describes as a type of emotional or psychic energy produced by living beings, particularly, but not limited to, humans. It's like spiritual or emotional energy. Now, this makes me think of things like prana, kundalini, chi, the concept of the force, like all this stuff, or like life force. Very interesting stuff. And in his book, this is the same guy now who talks about how, the entire CIA has based their psychic programs that are still ongoing. Skip Atwater talks in his interview. He said that there's like, at the very end of the Sean Ryan thing, he totally let slip that there's like 7 different programs going on that's still based on this technology. And I'm really sure he was not supposed to say that. But Monroe talked about collectors or disembodied entities that harvest this energy, leading to theories often referred to as the loosh farm. Interesting. Farming psychic energy from humans, from beings in other dimensions. Now, Isn't that an interesting idea? Because there's a lot of people that have said that, well, if these UFOs are coming from other dimensions, then what are they here for? What are they after? Why are they juicing up on what's going on this planet? What is that exactly? And I put it to you, I think that these suckers are loosh farming us. They're essentially draining our PPE for old palladium rift skies. They're gathering our psychic energy. And humans being farmed for loosh energy, Tom Campbell says that love is the highest form of this energy. Okay, he's gone on to state that like love is the greatest, but it's way easier. Like they'll eat any of this energy, and as we know from the internet, that anger, fear, prayer. Well, let's just go with anger and fear are really easy to create with the web. Social media is nothing but an anxiety magnet, and people now have probably more emotional energy and disturbance being cranked out by the web. And if there was these loosh farmers, they'd for sure love this stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's very obvious that if you were going to try to set up some sort of infrastructure, it kind of dovetails pretty nicely. And this brings us to a book that was written in 1993 by a guy named William Bramley called The Gods of Eden. Now, I'm going to start to piss people off, and the next World Breach episode's really going to piss people off because I started to talk a little bit about organized religion. Now, let's be clear now. There is good and evil, okay? There is God, for lack of a better term, okay? There are powers that are beyond our comprehension. But I do think that there are, if you were to have, say, ancient Egyptians, and they were all to pray to this symbol, and they were to focus their energies on this symbol. They were to sacrifice to this symbol. All this loosh energy, I theorize, and I'm not alone in this, has a tendency to pool around that symbol. So when you access that symbol, you access all the energy which is stored there. You see where I'm going with this? It's like you have this cloud of energy which is created, and then you can access it once again. And this, when you look at the Gods of Eden book by William Bramley and consider loosh farming, it gives a why to the how. So no audiobook for this, I'm afraid. But in this book, it talks in great detail about how it appears that outworld entities have clearly been working through the world religions to promote suffering, chaos, and discord. In other words, hardcore loosh farming. Now, to reinforce this, there is an event that I think about, it blows my mind. And this is what we're going to be getting into in this episode here, which I don't know if you know about the miracle of Fatima. Now, this was a crazy event that occurred in 1917, like mind-boggling stuff. But it's important you read. Now, I bought the book, The Gods of Eden, quick read, little pocket book. It basically explains how different religions have been, the Jesuits pretty heavily, and other religions, which I don't want to get banned or whatever, or get my head cut off. So we're not going to get too deeply into that. Do your own reading. But you can see how organized religion has caused a lot of war, a lot of strife, a lot of problems. Now, this Fatima was this thing that happened in 1917 in Portugal. Now, what's interesting is, as we know, in 1917, the World War I was happening. And in Portugal, they were running an experiment at that time to totally in hard militant atheism, no spiritualism, okay? So much so that it was like, it was pure political vilification. If you were Catholic, it was like, we were talking about militant atheism. It was like, you would lose your job. There were newspapers that would, like, if you believed in anything, you were destroyed. You'd lose your job. You would be run out of town. No one would talk to you. You wouldn't be able to date anybody. You'd be shunned by everybody if you didn't agree with the mainstream narrative about, what does that remind me of? I can't think of what it is right now, but it reminds me of something. I'm sure it'll come to me before the end of the show. But yeah, if you disagreed, man, you were done. You were out of it. So on May 13th in 1917, there was these 3 kids, okay? And they were like 8, 9, and 10. And they're farmer kids. They're like literally shepherds. They don't go to school. They're cousins. It's 2 girls and a boy. And they're out in this field doing their shepherding thing, looking after animals and stuff. And they claim that this light appears and a woman known as the Lady shows up. Now, what was interesting about this is when it was described what she was wearing, because everyone, immediately the church latched onto this later, but when the original reports was she was wearing a skirt that went above her knee. Oh my gosh. Now, in 1917 Portugal, that's basically like being naked. All right. So it was really bizarre that the Lady showed up not dressed like Mary, and she came out of this light that these 3 kids saw and started talking to them, and blah, blah, blah. A bunch of things were said. They're basically locked on. Kids fail their saving throw. They're seeing whatever is being pumped into their brains. That's it. But one of the things that was said was, hey, for the next 6 months, on the 13th of every month, we're going to come back. You show up here, I'll appear, and at the end of the 6 months, there's going to be a miracle. So you can just imagine, right? The kids go home. They tell their parents. The parents are like, shut up. There's no such thing as this. This is garbage. So a month later, the parents and a few family members go back, and it appears again. So then the parents lose their goo. Then you've got, like, the next time, the 3rd month into this, you've got, like, hundreds of people there that heard about this. And so on and so on. It got so that, like, the military got involved. They're trying to stop people from going there. It's crazy stuff. So by the time the 6th appearance appeared, like the 6th on October 13th, there was between 70 and 80,000 people at this place in Fatima. It was called the Miracle of the Sun. And this is absolutely nuts. It was raining. Like 80,000, like, reporters, priests, everybody was there. A lot of them were there to be like, debunk this is crap, we don't believe in this, all of it's garbage. I mean, think about it. If you knew a miracle was going to happen in some location and everyone was saying it was happening on this, wouldn't you go there? I mean, you take a bus to go there. So on this day, it's raining, 2 inches of mud on the ground, rain clouds, whole deal. And then at the appropriate time, the clouds open up. A disc, a flying saucer, or they called it a translucent disc, but essentially a flying saucer comes down through the clouds, flies around, broadcasting this crazy Technicolor light, which act a lot like radiation. People were getting these weird discolorations on their skin, bounces around. People lose their mind. Okay, people are falling to the ground. They're confessing sins. There's a great story about these priests that went there to try to, like, disprove all this stuff, and they started confessing all kinds of sick stuff when they hit the ground. I'd love to have been there to see that, because that would have been just, I mean, I like watching people freak out. But anyway, so this thing bounces around in the sky doing absolutely, typical UFO stuff, and then blips out of there. Now, the 80,000 people didn't see this woman. They only saw the UFO. Only the kids saw the woman, the Lady, as it was called. Okay, but at the end of all this, everybody who was there, the ground is dry, their clothes are dry, it's as though it was never raining, and it was called the Miracle of the Sun. The church goes mental. Okay, they lock these kids down. In, like, the boy went to a monastery, girls go to convent. Nobody is allowed to talk to these guys. Like, this was like Vatican, Jesuits, CIA hardcore, okay? And they locked these kids up. Now, one of the kids was this girl, I believe her name was Sister Lucienda, and she claimed that the beings gave her 3 secrets, all right? Now, the 3 secrets that was being talked about this, and I've linked to an interview with a guy who was there, like a black and white interview with a dude who was on the ground at that time. Now, when this Sister Lucienda, she wrote in 1944, she said there was basically 3 secrets. The first was a vision of hell, which is pretty handy for loosh farming. Like, hey, you should definitely be pumping out all your psychic energy doing prayers and stuff like that, because, otherwise eternal torment for you, which doesn't seem super balanced to me, but whatever. Don't inundate me with religious theology. I'm not interested. The second secret was about evangelization. Go make more loosh farmers. Like, we need more psychic energy here. But the third secret was written down in 1944, and it wasn't supposed to be opened until 1960. Now, when the letter was opened in 1960 by a pope, it was read in a room full of cardinals. And there was a Jesuit translator in that room, because he was a language master and all these cardinals from all over the world. But that translator's name was Father Malachai Martin, and he was a Jesuit priest. Notes on the Jesuits. The Jesuits, if you don't know much about the Jesuits, to be a Jesuit now, you have to have a PhD in order to just even to be a Jesuit. And the Jesuits are the Vatican's CIA. That's what they are. I mean, these guys have been the Vatican's secret police and CIA arm since forever. Okay? And an interesting thing is that Danny Sheehan, the lawyer connected all over the disclosure and UFO movement, was a candidate for the Jesuit priesthood and worked with the Jesuit order's social ministries, aligning his legal pursuits and social justice with Jesuit ideals. Although he was later ordained in the diocese of Brooklyn, which is not an official Jesuit, but he's kind of a Jesuit. You know what I mean? He's like an undercover Jesuit, because he's like totally in with these guys, but he's, it's like when you work for the CIA, but you don't work for the CIA. It's the same thing. So Danny Sheehan is deeply, deeply involved in all this stuff. And isn't that funny that the Jesuits, you see how all this is kind of combining? You see where I'm going with this? And all this then goes back to the louche farming from Robert Monroe, because let's bear in mind, the entire psychic research we're doing is based on Robert Monroe's work from the Monroe Institute. And that guy said there were beings in other dimensions that were harvesting our energy. And that's, I don't really want to get too heavy into the weeds essentially the third secret. Yeah, so I linked to an article, the last article he did with Art Bell, where he claimed he would never reveal the third secret. He wouldn't reveal the third secret ahead of the church unless, the church fell apart, and then he'd reveal it. So if the core fell out of the church, like if everything went evil, then he'd reveal the third secret, right? Incidentally, he dies. A year or so later, church was like, oh yeah, here's the third secret. But according to a lot of people that were involved, and on his last interview he did with the late great Art Bell, which again, Coast to Coast AM, man, like all roads lead to coast to coast. He went on talking about how the church was essentially going to become corrupted, where whether or not you agree with this or whatever, they're saying that all the stuff that was classically involved with the church, like, no to gay marriage and all this kind of stuff, that would all be thrown out, and the church would become completely, I believe the term was apostate. I might be wrong on that, but it's, I'm not up on my Catholicism. But essentially, the church would become corrupted, and this was the third vision of this kid. Which, hey, great, whatever, I don't care, all right? Because what's important here is that only those 3 girls saw the lady, all right? And that's interesting. And what else is interesting is when you look at Chris Bledsoe. Now, if you don't know who Chris Bledsoe is, he was a builder who saw a UFO, and a being showed up out of a UFO that called herself the Lady. Now, when she showed up, she actually appeared, and there was this like vision of a cow that ran him over, and it was made of stars, and it formed into this woman. And it seemed to go back even for, no one ever makes that tie-in to the miracle of Fatima. But it's interesting because they talk about Hathor, which is this Egyptian goddess. And she's a major Egyptian goddess of the sky, love, beauty, music, motherhood, and joy. She was considered the Eye of Ra, powerful and protective deity. Her worship was widespread, associated with dancing, singing, and the afterlife. All that good, lushy kind of stuff. So the thing is that Chris, who was out, he was going through a bunch of stuff. 9/11 happened. He lost everything. He was pretty desperate, wandered through the wilderness, came across a UFO. And again, the mind control stuff starts. This lady shows up. It's a wild, wild interview. I've linked to his interview with Danny Jones, and I believe this guy, because after all this happened, he started talking about this. And oh yeah, he could summon orbs. Like he could summon UFOs on demand. So, as you can imagine, everybody shows up. The CIA shows up, NSA shows up, MI6, Mossad, everyone shows up to see this guy. And he does it. He did it for Danny Jones, who's there on the podcast, and he was like, I don't even know what to make of this. This was some crazy stuff. And it's funny, you can actually see the mind veil lock in real time over Danny Jones, because he sort of talks about it now. He's like, yeah, I don't know what that was. Well, at the time when it had just happened to you, you were pretty spaced out. And you can actually see the effects of ontological shock in that interview. So you definitely want to check this stuff out. But Chris Bledsoe was it was very interesting how he identified with the lady. And everybody else was really interested. By everybody, I mean all these intelligence organizations were also really interested in the lady. And is this the same lady from the Miracle of Fatima? Because now the church is gone and it's been like, oh, that was Mother Mary and blah, 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 blah. Okay, whatever, man. They just hijacked the narrative, because what happened there is that only 3 kids who you locked away in a convent and totally mind wiped, they're the only ones who say they saw a woman. So sure, you can say whatever you want. Oh yeah, they said this, they said that. Nobody believes you, okay? But what is true is that 80,000 people saw a UFO come down and cook the soil and stain everybody with radiation. So that's some interesting stuff. Side note, Chris Bledsoe said that in 2026, on Easter specifically of 2026, there was going to be some heavy stuff going on. Meaning there was going to be some sort of UFO revelation. And he names the date. He doesn't name it in this interview, but he names it in a later interview. And I'm just passing that on so you're aware of it. You know, might want to have your kit sorted out by Easter of this coming year, just as a general idea. So, you know, you should probably make sure you check your oil before then. So when you look at this and you consider all the super well researched about the information in Gods of Eden, this means that all the people of the book are lightly or unwittingly trapped inside of a system they didn't choose in order to be farmed, to drain their psychic energy. These spires like antennas reaching up to the sky. And yeah, I mean, when you think about it, I mean, prayer works. And yeah, now this isn't to say that miracles are a thing, because like when you're channeling energy into that pool, you can draw from that pool. If you invoke the names of the right deities, you can draw from that pool. That's what we've seen in things like ceremonial magic and stuff like that. So if you, and these pools don't seem to dissipate over time. So if you find ancient texts where for like 25,000 years people were, I don't know, cutting your heart out to sacrifice to an ancient spider god, and suddenly you start tying into that power, you see where I'm going with this? Does this remind you of anything? So it's interesting. It's interesting to me that like the Muslims, the Jews, and the Christians all claim that they work for the same God. Okay, not like the God of the book, like in their religious text, it's all the same God. They argue about who the prophet is. Like in Islam, it's this Muhammad guy, and then there's Jesus, and I don't think the Jews, their prophet hasn't shown up yet, so they're all... And this to me is the craziest thing in the world. It's like having the U.S. Army, the U.S. Navy, and the U.S. Air Force all killing each other for the president. Oh no, we follow the president. It's like, really? Like, I don't... That is the weirdest thing about the big three, is that they all claim they work for the same God, and yet they're killing each other. It doesn't... That is the craziest stuff ever, but it dials in pretty easily with this loosh farming and the Gods of Eden book. So that's how these two are connected. And of course we have the techno movement, which should be the most liberating technology that's ever invented, and it's creating more emotional chaos than ever. So again, even more of this so-called loosh farming that the CIA, has said that this is kind of what's going on. Again, I'm not attacking people's beliefs here. It's not... Well, I guess I'm sort of pointing out that, hey man, like, it appears from the evidence that, has come from these sources that your psychic energy is being taken. And I would attack those that use secret knowledge to control others by using their belief against them. Like ancient Aztec priests who had knowledge of astrology, so they could make predictions that showed that they were right. So they say, see, the eclipse happened, and that's why we should be cutting your heart out, is because they have a big story to tell, and yeah, we get to cut people's hearts out for that. Which human sacrifice, mulak, a lot of sacrifice of young people, sometimes babies. You couple all of this with this loosh farming thing. It kind of starts to make a bit of sense. Now, I'm not the first person to suggest all this. In fact, the idea of being farmed by aliens is terrifying enough. But essentially, if Robert Monroe is right and we are being farmed by interdimensional beings, wouldn't that make this whole disclosure thing make sense? Like, meaning the men in black are killing people rather than having information known. So what if the actual truth of it is that there's interdimensional beings that are feeding on us? Like, that's going to make people not go to work. For sure, that's going to make people not go to work. If they're like, oh yeah, by the way, there's yes, Timmy, make sure you say your prayers tonight, or the monster in the closet's probably, not going to be fed, and then he'll come and swallow your soul. Not good stuff. That's intimidating. It's scary stuff. But I think that we have to be able to face that as kind of a worst case scenario. And when you look at this and you see what's happening, we need to come up with some sort of a plan. And that's why I have visions of an internet-independent network of hunters. That's what monster hunting is going to be about. I think about things like we could develop radio procedures, ways to let monster hunters identify themselves at conventions. I came up with an idea about, dressing outside of time. That's what these men in black do, these so-called men in black. They show up and they've got this car that's a classic car, and they look slightly off. So if you go to a convention, rather than being all Tactical Dave or whatever, you could just show up and look well, but wear a set of clothing that is outside of time, meaning it could be anywhere from, say, 1900 to 2025. Like the flat top haircut, classic pants. The men in black, the black suit, that suit has been the same for forever. So that's a classic example of the men in black. Just an idea. And that way, if you were to see another monster hunter, it'd be a really easy way to identify them. Let me know what you think. I mean, there's other ways we can work this out. Maybe there's a more technological means. But what's important is that this remains highly, highly distributed. It can't all just be following one guy. You can't all just buy one book and run from that playlist. This has to be something that's like a mass consciousness thing that we can all work together on. And I'm going to be trying to do my part as best I can and get this information to you. I'm giving you these ideas to kind of show how these things are connected. And I think the loosh farming thing, or beings that are feeding on our psychic energy, the human mind is the most complicated thing we can find. It's the most complicated thing known in the galaxy. Why can't we find anything more complicated than us? And we're not really sure how we got this way, how we got uplifted. So what if, kind of like the Matrix, we're the batteries? We're the things that these things are feeding on. You look at poltergeist encounters and how it always seems to be happening with younger kids that are going through an emotional state, or when people die and they're in heavy emotional states, that's what causes ghosts. Very quickly, you see how all this kind of lays on top of each other. This isn't my idea. This is all stuff that the government has been doing research on, and is doing research on to this very day. But that'll do it for this broadcast. So make sure you tune in every Thursday, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, for the Breach Report. And next week, I'm going to start talking about how to deal with this stuff, exercises and whatnot that we can do as individuals to try to build up a little bit more know-how, something we can work on. I've already laid some seeds, but I think that this is, as you do, and this isn't just to follow me, man. You got to do your own research with this stuff. Check out all my links in the description. Make sure you like and subscribe. And, it's a good way to share this teachings with, teachings. It makes it sound weird when you say teachings. My teachings, But share the episode with other people and see if they're like, well, that guy's crap or whatever. And I'm sure that there'll be a lot of people who are going to say some stuff in the comments who are like, wow, this guy's super nuts. But, hey, that's generally, it's like, if you're in a video game and you start meeting the bad guys, that usually means you're going in the right direction. Till next time, everybody, make sure you get your wheels sorted out.